Let's invite the administration and the deputations to join us. You don't really need a microphone. We have a quorum. Let's invite the administration and deputations and individuals to come in to join us, and we can start the public hearing. Thank you. Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public hearing in relation to implementation arrangements for municipal solid waste charging. Let me remind deputations and individuals, if need be, you may use the earpiece in front of you. Channel 1 is Cantonese. Channel 2 is English, and Channel 3 is Putonghua. At the beginning of each session, I will ask deputations and individuals to speak. They will be given no more than 2.5 minutes each. Let me remind you that what you say and your submissions are not covered by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Please pay attention to persons attending hearings of the LegCo and those sitting in the public gallery. The notice contained various security measures. You'll find a notice in the letter sent to you, and those sitting in the public gallery, you may also obtain a copy of this notice from security guards. I also ask deputations and individuals, well, if you have prepared a submission, please write down your name on it and give your submission to our staff members for reference. I will now ask deputations to speak. Let's start with Mr. Xin Houfei from the Civic Party. Thank you. In relation to the waste charging, we do think that the direction itself is correct, but there can be better measurements in relation to recycling and recollection. I see that in the past few years, when it comes to recycling rate, it has been dropping. For plastic recycling, it has dropped by 10 to 20%, so more can be done. My personal experience, I have been to Chengyi to engage in some recycling activities. I found that, well, in some area there is not enough rubbish bin, so people just chuck rubbish everywhere. And for the second time, we see some rubbish bins, but I found that in these rubbish bins are lots of recyclables. So over a period of 3 hours, we have collected over 2,000 plastic bottles, which is a substantial amount. I have concluded 3 points. First, there is serious lack of awareness of recycling because people don't take away their own rubbish and separate the waste. It was just a performance venue. There are a lot of wooden planks. They can be properly recycled, but there is no supporting measure. The recycling industry told us that in the eco park there is a recycler for timber, but there are no collection points in the urban area and also no transportation support facilities so that waste timber can be reused. Before the charging scheme is put in place, there is still a lot to do. There needs to be further study about the producer responsibility scheme to extend it to other items. The items are to be recycled under community green stations. Can it be expanded to say food waste and timber? And there can also be activities to enable food donation so that organizations can donate food without being held liable for everything. And there is this. It was an advertisement of a little bug 40 years ago. And now there is just a modern version of a little bug. It's still the same thing, so we need to reflect on what happens with our policy. Next, Mr. Wan Zhongyin. In 2009, there was plastic bag levy. In 2015, it was fully implemented. However, there is very weak awareness of recycling in Hong Kong. Waste disposal rate is still very high. There are 2 ways for waste charging, by volume or by household by bag. Per capita waste disposal is 1.3 kilograms. If the administration wants to increase the recycling rate to 55% by 2022, I think the administration will have to first deal with a number of points. First, if they want to use the rubbish bags as waste charging, the direction itself is correct. But if the EPD sets the waste bag at 0.11 cents per liter, well, this is still affordable. I have done some survey. 70% of the respondents think that when it comes to a 3P household, it should be $30 to $44, and it will effectively promote recycling and waste reduction. Well, you can take into account the impact on grassroots and give them some kind of subsidy and support. A lot of people don't know about the implementation details, especially penalties. The EPD and the Environment Bureau will have to respond to these questions. First, in private areas, how can they ensure that civil servants can take enforcement action? And if enforcement actions are taken on a floor or flats, and if they propose to install CCTV, what about privacy? For illegal disposal, what about law enforcement and penalty? Thank you. Next, Ms. Zhao Xuying. Thank you. Before I talk about solid waste charging, I want to talk about the source. Inevitably, we generate waste. But the government do not put in place a proper waste reduction at source. So there is nothing they can do to solve our problems. Sometimes it's not because we don't want to be environmental friendly. It's just that we can't. Say, for example, after eating an apple, there is the core. I know that I can put it for food waste, but there are no food waste recycling facilities, I can only put it into the litter bin. But what about chargeable batteries? Well, they have spent a lot of money to promote the litterbug and also the modern version of litterbug and also big waster. Why don't they use the resources to help with recycling as waste reduction as source? Grassroots are hard hit by charging. What about using rewards as an incentive? Say in overseas supermarkets, there are recycling machines. You can put tin cans and plastic bags, and you can get a certain monetary amount. You can use the amount to make payment or donate it to charitable organizations or on environmental promotion. This will allay the pressure faced by grassroots and will also encourage people to be more environmental friendly. We have a large population and is high density. We have many different buildings, standalone buildings, residential estates, subdivided flats. Say for some standalone buildings, they just put the waste at the street for FEHD refuse collection vehicle to pick them up. But if the waste is not contained in a designated bag, will they be picked up? There are some organizations proposing to install CCTV. I think it's just tackling the symptom only. We see some construction waste accumulating into mountains. Yes, we need to have waste charging, but we need to have waste separation. We need to have producer responsibility, and there should be many other measures in place to make it happen. Next is Liu Xingxue. Good afternoon. The New People's Party think that waste reduction as source should be promoted, and the responsibility should be taken by the entire society so that waste can be properly disposed of. But when it comes to by household, by bag, it involves the change of behavior, and it will also have direct impact on the community and also the neighborhood. So that it's very complicated and it will be difficult. At 9 p.m., I took a picture of this in my housing estate. There are 6,382 people in my residential estate, and there are 7 recycling bins. And in the evening, all these bins are full every day. So when there is waste charging, do you think the recycling bin will be able to cope? And there is also illegal disposal. The government say that if someone uses a non-designated bag, you will not collect the waste. Then who is responsible for that?
The property management company cannot get rid of that practice. So it's the law-abiding residents who would bear the burden of the cost. And there would be 90% of housing estates of single block buildings which do not have property management companies, and there could also arise the illegal waste disposal problem. Now, most people are willing to put in effort for reducing waste at source, but feasibility is the issue. The government should not hurry to implement levy by bag. It should first consider how to upgrade the recycling facilities in the districts and try to reduce the impact on the neighborhoods. This would be a long-term solution. Next, Ms. Zhang Kai-yan. The Democratic Party in principle supports the polluter pays principle, but we only offer conditional support for the levy scheme. The government must take the lead in recycling. The waste disposal fee issue should make funds available to the recycling sector. In kitchen waste, for example, there should be support for scientific research to support the development of machinery and equipment in this regard. For instance, glass bottles could be turned into sand, etc. And people should be able to make a contribution in this regard. So there should be interdepartmental cooperation to support innovative technology and agricultural policies. And the refuse charging scheme, now actually there are various departments which play different roles. Now if the policies are not effective, which department would be held responsible? So the departments should enhance their cooperation, and their functions and responsibilities should be clarified. And on the municipal solid waste recycling scheme, now if you discard by mistake, you may be penalized, but there are no incentives. Now in other countries, there are automatic recycling machines. Now, there are NGOs which receive ECF funding, and they provide incentives. Now, there are these facilities, but they are rather far and few and far in between. So these services should be made more available. There should be more locations to offer recycling facilities. The FEHD should have a tendering scheme to reward outsourcing contractors, and so that the cleaners and the contractors can play a role. Next, Mr. Wong Yu-hon. Now, I represent New People's Party, and now this is a issue of legislation. Now, we have to talk about enforcing the law. For instance, Tobacco Control Office has been established a long time, and yet people smoke at all kinds of places, and the office has done little. Now, the EPD will set up a 100-person team to do law enforcement, but how much can they do? Now, I'd like to know, are the FEHD and the EPD already in close communication on how to enforce the law? Now, you can learn from abroad. For effective law enforcement, you can't just rely on undercover action by government departments. There is a information offering incentive scheme in various countries. So unless we have this, then not enough action would be taken to enforce it. Now, you are talking about 4,000 locations for placing waste bags. Now, will they break the law if they place the garbage elsewhere? If they let somebody else use the bags, will that be against the law if more than one household use the same bag? Or if they put the bags at the collection point for people to share, would that be against the law? Now, we are talking about reducing waste at source, but kitchen waste, that's 30 or 40% of the domestic waste. But how do you take that up? Now, there are the district green stations. Now, the government should offer direct support to the industry in that regard. Next, Mr. Wong Wing Ho. I very much agree with the municipal solid waste charging scheme. Now, in the early 2000s, the schemes have been implemented in Korea and Taiwan with great success. We are almost 20 years late. Now, there should be different types of bags for different types of waste, and there should be different charging standards. For instance, paper and aluminum cans, they are of higher value, so the the fee charge should be lower. Only this way would you offer incentive to separate waste at source. And by increasing the number of recycling bins, now actually the results have not been satisfactory. In other countries, they have CCTV monitoring this, and if people discard domestic waste into the recycling bins, they would be prosecuted. But if you go to Mong Kok or Causeway Bay, you can see that half of the recycling bins are filled with regular domestic waste. And so people do not have confidence. And the FEHD is in charge of waste, but it's not in charge of the environment, and it's the other way around for the EPD. So there is no little coordination. The recycling bins are under the FEHD, and we are against the government using public funds to join in the recycling industry. Now, the recycling industry is suffering. Now, there's little value. Now, the government often spends hundreds or even billions for tendering, and only a few companies win the tendering bids, and there's lack of transparency. It's unfair for the recycling industry. Mr. Lam Chan Hoi, the DAB is in principle supportive of the scheme. The government's suggested charge now for a 4-person family, it's about $33 to $51 per month. We think this is on the expensive side. Some families on CSSA need help. There should also be exemptions for them. For those over 65, they should also be exempted, because they only rely on elderly allowances of $1,000 per month. Some earn about $30, $40 a day of collecting cardboard. So the monthly expense on the waste disposal is a burden for them. So for the small and medium enterprises, if they pay $500 to $1,000 additionally for the waste disposal, this increases the pressure on them, and eventually the burden will be shifted onto the consumers. There should be facilities to reduce kitchen waste so that the waste can be reduced at source. And there should be more fairness on the levying arrangement. Now, if the government levies charges on the public and it doesn't have good recycling support measures, it's unfair. The public lack the channels to carry out recycling, and they are forced to pay for the waste disposal. There are insufficient recycling facilities for a building. There are only one set of recycling bins, and there are no adequate kitchen waste collection facilities. The government tries to promote good practice for waste recycling, but we believe that in the next few years, improper waste disposal will continue to be seen. So in the interim period, the government should try to distribute the bags free of charge to the public so that they can cultivate the practice. Mr. Low, please be seated for a while. You just come in. Mr. Chiu Yan Loy, I'm from the Labour Party. Now we are talking about municipal solid waste charging. I don't think many people would be against it, and the Labour Party is in support of this general direction. Now, we have talked to different management groups. They find that there is an implementation issue. Now you need to use a green designated bag for waste disposal, but Hong Kong is densely populated. It's unique in this regard. There are many tall buildings, and in many old-style buildings, there are no garbage chutes for handling waste. Very often, the garbage is merely placed in the back staircase. Now, if there are 1 or 2 households on the floor which don't use the designated plastic bags, then how do you deal with that? How do you enforce the law? Now, as far as we know, right now the FGHD cannot gain access into private housing developments to enforce the law. So how do you implement this scheme? Now, if we don't use the green bags for waste disposal, then who will pay for the eventual delivery of the waste to the refuse collection vehicles? Many housing developments will face this problem. So people will ask, you tell me to reduce waste, that's not a problem. But when I want to discard some recyclable waste, are there facilities for that? And it's been said that the recycling industry is suffering. And in the past few months, we have found that plastic bottles are discarded in large volume, and yet many recycling operators are closing up shop. And in many housing estates, there's no recycling operator to take care of the waste. Good afternoon, I'm Chang Chak-man. I support reducing waste at source. I'm against waste charging. The government charges by household by bag. That's impractical because there are many tall buildings. Hong Kong people work very hard and are too busy to take care of the waste. So, and how can the FHD gain entry into private buildings? So the large property companies will make a lot of profit. Now the rich people don't care about the charge, but for the grassroots, they will suffer. The government is monopolizing the garbage bag business. That's against free market economy. And the charging by household by bag, this will allow the government departments to infringe on privacy. There will be a reduction of garbage bins. So this is counterproductive. There should be mandatory recycling by category. And at supermarkets, there are machines for collecting plastic or glass bottles. You would be paid if you use them. And there should be use of technology. Now, there is a Mr. Lee who turned waste into plastic bricks, etc. And and there should be regulation against over packaging of products. There should be tax on certain practices. And in Indonesia, they have invented environmentally friendly bags using yam as material, and there should be better alternatives to the waste charging scheme. Mr. Low Kim Man, are you ready? Please speak. Now, municipal solid waste charging scheme will be effective in 2019. There will be there will be two arrangements. Now, first, by month by volume, that is by weight. This is beneficial for the grassroots, but this is not so for the businesses, because the grassroots, they may discard waste 4 or 5 times a month, and so if you measure by weight, this will benefit the grassroots families, because 4 times a month they only get charged $10 to $20. For the businesses, if it's under 1 kilo, it's $5,000. If it's over 1 kilo, it's $10,000. So it's a heavy burden for them, and the burden may be shifted onto the consumers. But now for the charging by month by bag, now by household by bag, now $90 is very expensive for the grassroots. It can provide 3 meals for them, but for the shops, they can pay for the bags, and it's not charged by weight, so they can discard a lot. So the landfills, 80% of the volume is actually from businesses. The grassroots are only 10 to 20% by weight. So the EPD should collect statistics. Now, for the landfills, is there more waste from businesses or from the grassroots? They haven't provided the figures, and they merely say that the scheme by weight is preferable, and so it's unfair to the grassroots.
So there should be recycling facilities for kitchen waste in the 18 districts. Sorry, your time's up. Next one, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Greenest Action supports the government's move to charge waste. As mentioned by the deputations, Hong Kong is already lagging behind other neighboring countries. We should not wait any further. And our stance is very clear. We think that there should be a unified rate for each household on a per-bag basis. This is due to the equity principle. And secondly, only this can we ensure a policy of polluters pay. And we also think that the charge proposed is really worth the money, worth the value, and also because we have to have a certain charge to have a deterrent effect. Just interpretations mentioned that waste should be reduced at source. The charging fee will be a useful means to reduce pollution at source. In March and April, we carried out a survey. We found that based on the government's current charging level, about 1/3 of the residents would be willing to reduce waste at source. So therefore, if the government wants to get more people to reduce waste more and to have more recycling, then I think that the charges proposed, and also based on the report by the Sustainability Committee, that the fee will be reviewed in 1 or 2 years, so we support that. And we also echo the view of some deputations about the need for monitoring. We're pleased to hear that the government will set up some sort of waste reduction team to carry out monitoring and prosecuting or even public education and publicity. So we can see that often people are worried what it means to have broken the law, what is legal, what is illegal. I think the waste reduction team could enhance public education and have more contacts with the public to let them know what is right or wrong, and also the implementation details of the charging fee. We also think that, as also mentioned by the deputations, the EPD and the FHD have some conflicting roles. I think you should rationalize the powers and responsibilities of both departments so that the charging fee can really achieve the goal of reducing waste by 40% in a decade. Thank you. Next one is Ms. Feng Ho-yong. Good afternoon. I'm representing a Hong Kong PR firms company. We represent 45 PR companies, public relations companies, and help companies promote the culture of corporate responsibility. Often, public relations activities always generate waste. Therefore, we support this charging fee to reduce waste. We hope that this can bring a notable improvement in waste reduction and also have waste reduced at source. Before the scheme is implemented, we urge the administration to tackle three main issues of which are of concern to our clients. That is, in terms of management of large-scale events like expos or sports events, the administration should ensure that the event operators and the providers of the venue should provide adequate facilities for recycling. For example, on a one-to-one basis, providing litter containers and also rubbish bins. There should also be regular inspection to monitor the generation of waste. And for the retail industry and the waste caused by it, the government should clarify who are responsible for paying the fee. For example, in shopping malls, when they're promoting their products and are asked to stage their promotions elsewhere, or if some F&B tenants can only provide disposable cutleries to their clients, then who should also pay for the extra cost and also the waste charge? There should be clearer guidelines for tenants and also retail companies. And I hope that the administration can understand that beach cleanup and kitchen waste removal are common CSR activities. Last year, more than 80,000 volunteers have taken part in Clean Hong Kong activities, collecting 5,500 tons of garbage. Then would this activities be given the support they need? Thank you. Next one is Mr. Tam Shu-Sing. Thank you, Chairman. We are from the Hong Kong Catering Association, and we are deeply worried about the municipal solid waste charging. We don't see how polluters pay, and also paying on the basis of quantity can reduce regeneration of waste. We think that waste of food actually is, of course, creating unnecessary waste. So we don't see how we would not have proper acts to contain kitchen waste. And catering outlets would need to spend more money and manpower to comply with the law. And so far, we are having a staff shortage in the industry. And if the charging schemes are too complicated, that will only increase our financial burden. And also, the government has not eased our worries at all. There needs to be adequate facilities for recycling and sorting of garbage to help us reduce waste. And there are actually also not enough facilities for us to recycle kitchen waste and other waste collected. All of the most of the sorted waste end up being dumped in landfills. So if this remains the case, how can we be willing to pay the extra fee for MSW? I think you need to provide us with more incentives and also provide support for recycling activities to encourage waste reduction. And also, before you implement the charge, you must reduce rates to avoid double charging. Thank you. Next one is Mr. Yao Yik-chung. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for inviting us to come. Our association has been done a lot of work in reducing waste. We have helped 60, 70 housing estates to reduce waste. In Taipo, we actually open up a plastic recycling station. So we support this move to charge MSW. But the current penalty or fees for waste are acceptable, but not the masses were supported. So the government must consider providing some incentives to encourage members of the public to reduce waste. That means we have to provide carrots and sticks. In Shenzhen, I noticed that in a housing estate there, each resident will have an octopus card used to buy garbage bags. And there's also a machine collecting garbage to see the quantity of your garbage every week. If you reduced the garbage, then the resident concerned will be invited into a lottery whose prizes include free concert tickets or coupons for supermarkets. On the other hand, the government will also use the fees used to buy the garbage bags to run the lottery. So the same idea could work in Hong Kong. I hope the government can consider using it. And in terms of education, I think like in Taiwan and Japan, you need to educate people when they were children, and also so they will be better used to the idea of reducing waste and turn Hong Kong into an environmental friendly city. Thank you. Next one is Mr. Chen Pui Ho. I'm from the Environmental Association, and we do support the MSW charging scheme. I think the charging principle is reasonable, and I think that most people will be able to afford it. That is, the general public should be able to pay and afford it. But how should you penalize the offenders? You should have clear guidelines. So we propose that for those who violated the law, besides being fined, there should be some requirements for them to perform social service, like cleaning up the street for 1 day as a penalty. And also, in launching the scheme, the government proposes increasing publicity for reducing waste and emissions. I think you can help people reduce waste more through your publicity, but how about emitting less pollutants? I think reducing waste should include efforts to recycle products, because only when you have recycling can the waste be turned into useful products. But in Hong Kong, we are in severe shortage of recycling facilities. Besides the 3-colored recycling bins on the streets, indeed, the recycling bins have now been used as rubbish bins or litter containers. So some people have sorted their rubbish, but yet we have not reached our target of reducing waste. But we have indeed inadvertently increased quantity of waste. So therefore, the government must provide more recycling facilities. Government support measures like recycling bins, facilities, are very important. You may actually try to provide the facilities at housing estates, in private buildings, on the streets, or tenement buildings. I think it's very difficult for us to see or find any recycling facilities. Without those facilities, how can we reduce waste? So we need to pay attention to that, definitely. And among our counterparts, who work in the front line, we receive a lot of views. In low-income groups living in cubicle flats in the old districts, they came home very late normally, and when they cook, it's usually very late at night. And they found that how can they, when they're home so late, how can they dispose of their garbage? And where can they find the garbage bags? And can you ensure that they can buy the garbage bags when they need them? That's key. And also, are you sure that when waste are to be recycled, are you sure that there can be the bags available for people to put their waste in. So we propose that the government should increase efforts to actually to charge products as source. That is, there should be a recycling tax imposed on products so that there can be more products being recycled. Thank you. Just then, Miss Kwok Kim-man just arrived. You may sit a while, and I will ask Mr. Ng Hei-man to speak first before you. Thank you. Conservancy Association supports the MSW charging scheme. Of course, we do hope that the administration can make even better arrangements for the future. Some deputations have already spoken what we want to say, but I'll just highlight a few things. First of all, we would like to see the government unify the charging mode for households. Only then can we really utilize the spirit or show the spirit of polluter pays. And in the private collectors, collection stations, there are plans to charge on a per building basis, and with the cost be apportioned among residents. But there are two issues here. If you want to apportion the cost, it's like charging the households who create little waste to pay for households who create a lot of waste. So that's not fair. And secondly, also for residential buildings, you want to charge on a per household, per bag basis, and in some situations, the whole building may have to apportion the cost. So that could be confusions when it comes to implementation. You need to make things very clear, who should pay for what, and also to avoid unfairness. So there should be a unified approach, that is to get all the households pay on the basis of bags and so forth. And you can also ask the private waste collectors to collect the rubbish to achieve the goal of charging on a per household, per bag basis. And we also think that you need to rationalize the division of work between FEHD and EPD, because all along EPD is responsible for recycling, reducing waste, monitoring, but it's the FEHD who is watching over the recycling bins on the streets. So the waste quantity or recycling amount is to be made known to FEHD, but you need to let the EPD know what is going on, how much waste quantity there is as well. So you do need to rationalize the duties and functions of both departments, so that you can have a one-stop service in reducing waste and also carrying out recycling. Ms. Kwok Kim-man, now your turn. Thank you. Since the administration proposed the solid waste charging scheme, I've heard a number of views from various parties. Many, particularly those in the grassroots or those who are receiving CSSA, have expressed their concern, or those who are receiving government subsidies think that they may not be able to afford the costs because, they are on CSSA, many of them, and they don't even have enough to get by already. If there's an extra charge, then they would not be able to afford it. And also, personally, I think that, as you all know, bags are not environmental friendly. They're not made of environmental friendly material. I know that there could be water in some sorts of garbage, and you need to contain them in bags. But bags themselves, as you all know, are not environmental friendly. So can you use other more degradable material to contain the rubbish, so that we would not actually worsen environmental contamination by, through the charging scheme? I think the government departments should avoid creating more waste that is hard to be degraded. So I find the current proposal a bit strange in that regard. So we'll need to see how we can find better materials to contain the garbage. And also, I agree with one deputation that recycling bins are an issue. Even if you've sorted different kinds of rubbish, you can see that all these sorted waste end up being dumped as rubbish, and they are not recycled eventually. Next one is Mr. Chen Sam Choi. Well, Hong Kong's waste, well, actually, it's everybody's responsibility to reduce it at source. We are opposed to charging on the basis of quantity because, say, for residential building, if you charge them on the basis of quantity and charge residents extra management fees, then that may not be fair to all households. Actually, it's not something new. In 2005, EPD already proposed, the idea of charging for waste in industrial buildings. And in the public sector, there have been some effects, but then in the private sector, there's still lots of tipping, illegal disposal of waste. And when it costs $390 per ton of waste, then I'm sure there'll be more illegal dumping of waste. And I think the FVHD, I'd like to ask them how they dealt with waste. I found that 7 departments were involved in handling waste. So there's a great issue with the confusing roles. When you launch the charging scheme, if there's a lack of proper management, then I think what it will lead to is only more confusions. So we do hope that when you implement the charging scheme, you need to set up a 5-party management platform so that the sector, academics, environmental groups, residents groups can take part in managing the scheme. To avoid, fly tipping because of the charging on the basis of per household, per bag, you need to have to deal with reducing small amount of like 1 or 2 tons of NWS. Maybe people want to dispose of them legally, but there's alternative now because it's difficult to see trucks carrying 1 or 2 tons of NSW and drive them to landfills. So in every district, you must make effort to help deal with such a small amount of MS waste. Otherwise, you encourage more illegal dumping.
And there should also be incentive for buildings to do better management instead of imposing a levy on them. Next, Professor Poon. I engage in waste management in a university, and I found that between 2009 and 2015 there was a population increase by 5%. However, waste disposal at landfill has increased by 13%. This is indeed a very concerning trend. You may try to think about how come there is an increase in the amount of waste. You only have to go to chain fast food shops, and when you travel by plane and when you get off, you see there is a large amount of waste. Where does it go? Landfill. Recycling industry suffers a difficult time because there is not much profit to make. It is because there is no financial incentive. If there is a charging scheme, then there will be more incentive for them to do better, so the waste doesn't have to go to the landfill. A lot of people say that waste reduction at source is the best, and waste charging is the best way to encourage waste reduction at source. We see that in Taipei and Seoul, charging scheme has been put in place and it's been very effective. There is an instant reduction of amount of waste disposed of at a landfill. Quantity-based charging will effectively reduce waste, especially commercial and industrial waste. When it comes to domestic waste, a charge will enhance environmental protection in awareness. We have a very successful plastic bag levy. At the beginning, there was some opposition, and now you see the scheme has been implemented smoothly and successfully. Someone said there should be waste reduction at the source first, there should be recycling first before waste charging. And I think it's a matter of chicken and egg. Without an incentive, without an encouragement, there won't be any action. Thank you. Next, Mr. Ju Hon Kang. Thank you. In the past, when I attend public hearings, people will thank those who come to speak in a public hearing. And I thank legislators today because you will have to stay here till 7:30. I hope you won't leave halfway through. Green Earth support charging. Waste charging, because in Hong Kong we generate much more waste than other places. Waste charging is a locomotive, it's a drive, but that is not a panacea. We need some positive ways to resolve problems. In Seoul, in Taipei, they have conditions that are similar to Hong Kong, and they're often asked why Hong Kong people ask what made them a success. But this is the reason that they don't try to find any excuses. We need a uniform charging base by bag. Half of the waste is not collected by the FEHD, and they don't pay for the pollution they've caused, and that is not fair. There are over 40,000 buildings in Hong Kong. We think that instead of 100, maybe 700 or 1,000. Not a long-term burden, but it's just transitional. Some people asked a lot of questions. A lot of them are correct, but many of them shows a lack of understanding. We have talked to a lot of people in the community. It's not just for some management companies or some departments to do something. Secretary for Environment is not here. If he is here and if he stays with us in the next term, well, I think that if we can't have a recycling rate of 40%, he will have to be held accountable. Next, Mr. Ao. We are a staff association of the FEHD. When I think, well, what it says in this waste charging is that you have to buy designated bags and there will be an increase in manpower. But there is nothing about a long-term strategy. There is nothing done about overpackaging. The responsibility shifted on to citizens. And they just want to hit where it hurts. They want to use consumers to force manufacturers to change their behavior. When it comes to increase in manpower, some people talk about enforcement. Well, we have no less than 3,000 people who can take enforcement action, but still there is a limited amount of people that they can do. The FEHD will have to be gatekeepers. So at refuse collection points, Waste without a designated bag will be rejected. And the FEHD will have to also check for oversized waste label. I am honored that the Secretary show us such faith. But we are only talking about 200 out of thousands of refuse collection points that are manned. The others are just like the street bins. So how can the FEHD keep the gate? Who will be responsible when there are complaints? The FEHD's primary responsibility is environmental hygiene. So we have to clear the waste whether it's in designated bag or not. So a lot of the doubts and complaints will be directed at the FEHD. The image of the department will be affected. I'm afraid that the amount of complaints now standing at 200,000 will increase. You will find at various places, hillside, harbor, rear alleys, they will be black spots for illegal waste disposal. FEHD deals with tons of waste every day. The most important thing is producer responsibility and also waste reduction at source. When there is an increase in cost for producers, then they will find ways to improve their manufacturing and drive down their cost. The levies charge can be used on promotion of environmental protection. And cleaners who work very hard should be protected. Next, Ms. Lau Yin Na. Good afternoon. We have as association monitors environmental protection. We don't think that waste charging is the way to resolve overloading of landfill. There should be waste reduction as source. I repeat this point not because I have run out of ideas, because this is the only way. Waste charging is to divert the attention because we have flawed waste reduction policy. The responsibility is shifted on to citizens. Waste charging is unfair because people who don't have time to deal with their waste, people who work long hours will not be able to take care of their waste properly, and they will be penalized. We see a lot of food waste being disposed of in industrial buildings and commercial buildings. It's commonplace. We see a reduction of domestic waste, whereas commercial and industrial waste has increased. Why do you put the burden on citizens? There are many ways to promote waste reduction. Over the years, we see a failed waste policy because you have not done the fundamentals properly. Say over-packaging, waste of material. Recycling facilities exist in name only. People just chuck everything they don't need. People cite the example of Taipei. The general principle people seem to have forgotten is zero waste disposal. We need to reduce waste at source and also reuse. This is not a chicken and egg problem. This is the first step we have to do. So when it comes to implementation of waste reduction as source of producer responsibility scheme, we will not support the waste charging scheme. Next, Mr. Lin Jiwai. We've been talking about waste charging. We support implementation of the waste charging scheme. This will provide an incentive to reduce waste. If the waste charging scheme is to go ahead, I believe that the recycling rate and waste reduction rate will increase. But when there is when there is an increase in the recycle rate, where will the recyclables go? People ask how come that those cardboards would be taken away. What about waste plastic? Where does it go? It's down to demand and supply. If you find a market for recyclables, then people will recycle. The government has put in place resources and put in place policies to help this issue, say for example the recycling fund. But I think it's all down to demand and supply and whether there is a market. At the same time, when the municipal solid waste charging is put in place, they should make sure that there is a market for recyclables. Otherwise, the recyclables will keep accumulating. And there should be a recycling economy. On the website of the Legislative Panel on Environmental Affairs, I see that 50% of the designated bags will use recycled material. But there is nothing about where such recycled material comes from. Purchased from overseas or from Hong Kong. We use polyethylene PE to produce plastic bags. Can this be a good project to find a market for PE? Some people mention about biodegradable plastic bags. We have to be careful whether it is just degradable or biodegradable. If it is just degradable and not biodegradable, then if that item falls into the sea, it will create more problem. Next, Mr. Hon Members. We are Carbon Care Inno Lab. We do think that the direction of waste charging should be encouraged. Well, under ECF, there is a community participation scheme. When we talk to stakeholders, we have collected a lot of valuable views. When it comes to implementation of the waste charging scheme, I hope that they will take this into account. First, food waste. A lot of small operators think that when it comes to food waste, it's really far away from them. They hope that there can be more targeted measure of food waste. You can turn food waste into treasure. There can be recycle facilities at different districts. Some small operators would ask elderly people living in the district to collect waste for them. They can resell the carbon boxes they have collected, but they are not registered management companies. So they are afraid that the waste charging scheme will change this pattern. So there should be some studies to find out how many elderly people engage in scavenging. And there should be measures to ensure that the underprivileged will be given priority when it comes to recruitment of scavengers to collect recyclables. Grassroots should not be hit because of the charging scheme. There is another thing, oversized waste label. It says that regardless of size and volume, it will be about $11. So someone asked, if there is a bed dismantled into 3 parts, then there is $33, and if you nail up the bed together with chairs and tables, then it's still $11. So there should be a restriction on size, and there should be different rates. When it comes to oversized waste, there should be encouragement for usable parts to be taken off first. Next, Mr. Solchak. Hey, thank you. I agree that waste reduction should be our target, but I don't agree with rushing with waste charging scheme. There has been a number of environmental friendly schemes, say for example turning off prohibiting idling engine and some other plastic bag. However, the officials hide in an air-conditioned office to think of these ideas. Well, you have collected a plastic bag levy. You said you would engage contractors. You will only give contractors what you don't pocket. Idling engine. I think the government has forgotten about the bitter lesson. Plastic bag. There is no effective measure targeting non-woven bags. The government just went through the motions to talk about waste reduction and recycling, but there are no specific measures. The most important thing is to enhance awareness of waste separation. If you launch this waste charging scheme, you're only making more money. I'm not an environmental protection advocate. I don't bring my own bag with me, so when I go to the supermarket, I will just get a bag. Construction waste. No matter how many complaints you make, you fail to catch anyone. You just leave waste in non-designated bags in the street. The government said that they will have to catch someone red-handed. Are you going to station someone there in the streets? You don't have CCTV all over Hong Kong. And you can't just rely on people to make a report. As some people say that the charging scheme is only one part of it, but I don't see any sincerity from the government. It's still a long way to environmental protection. The Taiwanese example. Indeed, the amount of waste has been halved. I hope that after you have created an awareness, the government will stop the waste charging. I hope the government will make this a long-term goal. Next, Mr. Chen Ngai-kun. Thank you. Average waste disposal at landfill is about 15,000 tons. Per capita is 1.36 ton. Compared to other areas with waste charging, say for example Tokyo, Seoul, Taipei, the waste disposal rate in Hong Kong is quite high. It's a heavy pressure on our landfill. We think that implementation of waste charging scheme should be put in place as soon as possible. Christian Family Service Center is a non-profit making. We operate in Kwun Tong and Sha Tin.
And we have had experience in providing education on environmental protection. We think that there's a need to change the public's behavior, and the waste charging, I think, will be helpful for reducing waste at source. So we support the charging scheme being legislated at an early date. And the government should establish a recycling network that is adequate for the purpose. This is also key. Firstly, there should be an expansion of the community green stations to help the communities collect recyclable materials. There should be additional resources to assist community stakeholders so that they can implement the waste charging scheme and accumulate experience. Thirdly, there should be stepping up of public education so that the public is aware of the impact of the charging scheme, so that the quality and the quantity of the schemes outcome will be increased. Mr. Choi, we are the Environmental Facilitation Society. Now, when people engage in publicity and education, we often talk about the departments cooperating with each other. There's another department, that is the Education Department or the Education Bureau. Their role is very important too. They should incorporate environmental issues into syllabuses. There are 320,000 primary school students. The students can have an impact on the environmental sensitiveness of their families. So the Education Bureau has an important role to play. And right now, there are some ECF pilot schemes. Now, the public know that the plastics value is now rather low, so there should be a producer responsibility scheme for plastics. So there might have to be a deposit or a charge on the beverage producers. And also there are ideas about kitchen waste. Now, right now, people say that for kitchen waste machines to be installed, the problem is that there would be an odor. Perhaps there can be community green stations and markets that where we can install kitchen waste recycling machines. And then the FHD can collect all the kitchen waste for power generation and so on. And also there should be better positioning of recycling bins. But they are of limited capacity, that is 240 liters. So there should be more recycling facilities in buildings. Next, Mr. Lam Kok Leung. I am for the Caterers Association. We support the environment and we like to contribute, but we have discussed among ourselves for the MSW charging scheme. Every month we have to pay $10,000 to $20,000 more a month. We have to pay waste disposal fees, etc., and we earn a very slim profit margin. So there should be waste disposal incentives such as tax reduction or subsidies to the industry. Now, you will certainly implement the waste charging scheme. Now you have 9 different sizes of the garbage bags, but the thickness is very important. If the bags are not thick enough, we have to pay for a new bag. And the staff may not feel confident about having only one bag, then they might put on a couple more bags, so our cost will be increased. So please pay attention to the quality of the bags. Now, on kitchen waste recycling, the government should offer incentives so that in shopping malls and the developers can install recycling equipment in the shopping mall so as to reduce the quantity of waste. And on recycling bins on the streets, now there are many of us which are small and medium enterprises. Now if we want to engage in waste recycling or kitchen waste recycling, they don't have the space for these bins. So there should be more central recycling stations or points within the neighborhoods. So this is what the industry hopes the government would like the government to do. Now, when there are infringements, would the operators be responsible, or would it be the boss, the owner, or would it be the recycler that's responsible? So please clarify. Now, 29 deputations have spoken. There's not a lot of time left, 25 minutes left. First, Mankit, please respond. Now, Deputy Director, now people have requested incentive schemes, and on support facilities there are 3,000 recycling points, and the FEHD only monitors 200 of them. And when people just discard the garbage bag, will you collect them? And education is important. Now, for the catering industry, they feel that when you establish a new system, would you offer them more incentives so that their burden can be relieved? We thank the deputations and individuals who are here. You offer useful views. On the 20th of March, we disclosed the details of the scheme, and since then we have held many public hearings and discussions with members of the public. Now, on several aspects, I would like to respond in general. Now, before talking about implementation, some speakers have asked about the timetable. It's true that Hong Kong is lagging behind our neighbors in the implementation of waste charging. Now, it's true that in other places, implementation of such schemes do provide the incentives for a reduction in waste. So I hope that our future arrangements should certainly include waste charging. Now, on implementation, speakers talked about recycling. Before we levy the charges, we should do more on recycling, and in fact, in the past few years, we have adopted many measures. Now, actually, right now, nearly 80% of the population have recycling facilities near where they live or work. Now, after this charging scheme is implemented, would there be more recycling bins at housing developments or on the roadside? We'll certainly tackle those. Now, at residential developments, there would be more recycling bins, and on street side recycling bins. Right now, overall, there are 2,700 of them. Now, before the implementation of the charging scheme, we would increase the number to 4,000 sets from 2,700, and the ratio of recycling bin to garbage containers to litter containers, the ratio would be increased from 1 to 14 to 1 to 6. That is 6 litter containers to 1 recycling bin. Now, on promotion and publicity, or on software facilities, software support, now Now, clean recycling is very important on the price. Now, we know that for a lot of plastic bottles, there's not much incentive because within the housing developments, the plastic bottles are not clean, so they are of low value. So when we implement the charging scheme, we will step up publicity and education. Now, apart from the hardware, we hope to do more outreach activities in housing developments to implement clean recycling. Now, apart from hardware and software, speakers talked about kitchen waste as well. Now, kitchen waste is a high percentage of the waste disposed every day. In the future, we will try to promote kitchen waste recycling. There will be a kitchen waste plant, 200 tons per year. Now, there will be a second plant on kitchen waste. We are now implementing the tendering exercise. So overall, there will be 500 tons capacity. So this will 500 tons per day. Oh, I thought it was for a moment. I thought it was 500 tons per year. Now on regulations and legislation, now people asked whether we should implement more producer responsibility schemes. Now, actually, we have had progress in this regard. Apart from plastic shopping bags already implemented throughout the retail sector, and it has indeed been helpful in reducing the quantity of plastic bags. At the same time, regarding the PRS on plastic on glass bottles and waste electrical goods, we also have 2 PRS schemes coming up for implementation. Now, apart from these PRS schemes, can we have a PRS scheme for plastic bottles? Now, that question has been asked just now, and in the policy address it is said that there will be a PRS feasibility study with regard to plastic bottles. Chairman, apart from recycling, there's one more point. Now, on committee green stations, now the speakers asked us whether there can be a larger quantity of materials handled by these stations. Now, actually, there will be an extension of the scale, and there will be more categories of waste, such as electrical goods and used clothing, that will be handled by these stations. Now, on implementation or enforcement, when the scheme is introduced, enforcement is of course very important. Now, enforcement will be at 2 levels. First, at the refuse collection points, at the and the refuse collection vehicles, we will implement the arrangement. Now, if the frontline staff sees that the designated bags are not used, they may refuse to accept the waste, and we will enforce the law within buildings. Now, if we receive information or reports that designated bags are not used at certain locations, we will have a list of black spots where we will conduct spot checks, surprise checks now and then. So we will engage in law enforcement, both upstream and downstream. Now, will this be a strong demand on our manpower? Now, figures of 700 or 1,000 have been suggested. Of course, it depends on the implementation, but we do believe that an increase in manpower is needed. Now, apart from enforcement strategy, we've also heard suggestions about the levels of penalties. Now, if someone infringes the regulations, the first occasion we will issue a summons, and the suggested level of penalty is $1,500. That's about, say, for a 3-person family, $30 per month. This would almost be a total of 3 years of charges. So I think this will be deterrent enough. Now, also we will step up publicity on compliance. In Taipei and Seoul, they engage in a lot of publicity and education. That accounts for their success. Now, we have already introduced a slogan for people to discard less waste and save more. And we have engaged in a lot of publicity and education with different stakeholders. Now, should we work more with students and young people because they are large in number? Yes. We will take that into account in our future work. So much for these major issues. All right, so I now open the floor to the members. Leung Yu Chung has raised his hand. Yu Chung Yin, Chu Hoi Dik, 3 minutes each. We have about 15 minutes left. Just now I heard from the speakers, basically people are all concerned about waste disposal. We don't want to increase the burden on the landfills. Now, some are in support, some have objections, but there's an important point which applies in other countries. That is, there must be good support measures. Otherwise, it would not be very meaningful. Now, what support measures? That might include how to deal with kitchen waste.
Even domestic kitchen waste is a matter of concern, but you don't have an effective method to tackle it. And also recycling facilities. All these facilities right now are not enough. And we don't even have enough of them to tackle the current waste. So how can the administration come up with adequate support measures and then implement the scheme when the measures are in place? Otherwise, if you just do it in a compulsory manner, I doubt how effective it will be. And Didi said that they want to try to spearhead changes and force the residents to take the lead, and then the manufacturers will follow suit. But I think we may be heading in the wrong direction. We need to reconsider, the way to go. And your timetable, now with so much oppositions, quite a lot of oppositions now, at the community level, I've heard from many residents who really oppose the scheme. So can you really change your strategy? Didi? Thank you, Mr. Leung and Chairman. Our recycling facilities, I think you mean recyclables and kitchen waste. As I said in my reply earlier on, we do pay much attention to the recycling work, whether in hardware or software. In the past years, we've implemented various measures. As I said, in the years to come, we have new measures in the pipeline to support the charging scheme. But if you think that, I just also heard from the deputations about whether we should ensure all the recycling facilities are in place before implementing the charging scheme. Our view is that I think both should be done in parallel. And because with reference to other cities, when they implemented a charging scheme, when they actually at the time of implementation, the recycling facilities back then compared to Hong Kong were not very advanced actually. So I think we should carry out the changes in parallel. Next one, Edward Yu. Having heard from so many deputations, I feel that I think on the whole they are not opposed to the new change, but they just want to see whether there can be more done to tackle the waste at source and to also carry out the producer shoulders the responsibility. For example, why the manufacturers provide so much packaging and yet there's no penalties on them, and yet you ask the consumers to pay for them? It's not that they don't support buying bags to reduce waste generated by consumers, but why don't you at the same time make the manufacturers to reduce packaging? Your logic is that why don't we just let the consumers be the driver of market force? But that's a roundabout way. Can you at the same time, that is, you can have the charge for waste and yet hold more manufacturers responsible for the waste that they've generated? Now you're going to charge for glass bottles, so you can find a way so that there is incentive for the manufacturer to reduce packaging. Say, for example, making the manufacturers responsible to, say, after the packaging is unwrapped, that they are obliged to take back the packaging. Just adopt the concept of glass bottles to packaging materials so that the materials have the economic incentive to take the initiative to reduce packaging materials. So Mr. Yu was asking, like when I was shopping for shoes lately, I threw away the shoebox after I bought the shoes because I don't want to bring so much waste to home. So at the retail level, so can I just get a product and not the packaging? So if that's the case, would there be incentive given to the retail points who've collected the boxes or packaging materials? And then, because they can benefit from it, it's a matter of incentives. So, and also, what about fines if they do not do a good job with handling the packaging? Or how about providing sticks and carrots at the same time? Didi? I think, first of all, on the producer responsibility scheme, under it, I think Mr. Yu was asking whether we should have PRS targeting providers of packaging. But in the past, we have launched one after another series of PRS. Our next scheme will focus on plastic bottles. In considering whether there should be a new scheme, we need to consider various factors like the load on landfills and also whether the product can be legally defined clearly and whether there are disposal facilities for such products and so forth. So we need to look into all these factors first. And ahead, we are going to focus on plastic bottles. And also, as I said, for packaging, whether how we can encourage the retailers to reduce use of packaging. Besides voluntary schemes which we have been implementing, and also publicity, as Mr. Yu said, that is in the future, if we have the waste charging scheme, there will be a big incentive for the public and even for the provider of packaging materials to use less materials, or generally less waste. So product packaging, the materials used could be reduced in the long run under the scheme. I hope you can provide us with more information for our reference ASAP. Next one, Eddie Chu. Chairman, I'd like to ask, can I ask deputation's question? Yes. Okay. I'd like to ask Professor Poon, C.S. Poon. Just then, among the deputations, quite a number mentioned that, first of all, we need to sort the waste at source and to do a good PRS. That is to put the responsibility to the traders, business people first, before charging the general members of the public. And you disagree with that. So I'd like to ask you, in your study, have you discovered any findings that show that we need to have the waste charging scheme? And could there be phases in which if PRS comes first and then PRS follows, that could produce a better result? Have you done any relevant researches? I think the PRS and charging as source have been much talked about. Even when Christine Liu was the Secretary for Environment, the idea were put forward already. And back then, many people anticipated that such measures could be launched at the same time. But for various reasons, for PRS, the progress for PRS slowed down. But I feel that when it comes to managing waste, we cannot wait any further. We cannot actually do it on a step-by-step approach. We need to get everything done at the same time. Charging waste is the most effective means, to me, to provide adequate incentives for manufacturers, recyclers, and the public to reduce waste at source. The PRS is a complementary scheme targeting plastic bags or plastic bottles or glass bottles and so forth. So all those are complementary. But the charging itself, waste charging, is the fundamental, the most important. But how about in other areas? Have you got any information on how grassroots in other areas could be exempted without affecting the overall effect of the scheme? I don't know, really. But under the government scheme, I believe that, say for people in CSSA or other underprivileged people, I think it's really worth supporting giving them exemptions. Okay, we've still got 5 minutes left. Any other members with views or questions in the first round? If not, then we'll begin the second round. Eddie Chu. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask the DD. Quite a number of deputations mentioned that you should not charge, per bag in some cases, and yet charge per blocks of buildings in some other cases. So you should adopt a unified approach. That's what they're suggesting. So how would you respond to that? Say for a residential building, if you charge on a per block basis, then there wouldn't be any incentive for households to reduce waste. DD. I think on a future charging arrangement, we have two proposals. One is by bag, and that will be applicable to most residential buildings. As for the approach of by weight, I think this will apply to mostly the commercial industrial sectors, we think. And in the past, we've also heard views that for the per bag approach, the area covered by should be expanded to even buildings using private waste collectors. That is, they should not be charged on the weight basis, but on a bag basis. We've actually heard that view, and we are open about it, and we'll see which approach works better. We'll continue to have more discussions with the relevant parties. Okay, one question on my part. That is, now we have about a refuse collection station, which are open to everyone. So in the future, if people throw rubbish into the stations, would that be allowed? How can you plug the loophole of people just abusing the refuse collection points? Yes, as mentioned by one reputation as well, at the refuse collection points, not everyone actually was monitored by a frontline staff. Some were actually left unwatched. So in the future, we'll see whether there are many cases of people not using designated bags. And if it happens and refuse collection points were abused, then I think the enforcement arrangements will incorporate how we can do to avoid that, and we can actually, for example, have more periodic monitoring inspections at the points and try to make arrests of offenders, people who do not use designated garbage bags. I'd like to ask a follow-up question. Sorry, you'll be in the third round. I haven't used up my 3 minutes. Okay. As for added new staff, you're not saying 100, 700, but you don't know how many more people will be needed in the future to enforce the law. You'll see, how many more people or staff will be needed. I think just an interpretation asking whether we will only have more than 100 people of additional staff or 1,000. I think basically what I want to say is it will need to depend on the enforcement situation, and we'll arrange for the adequate manpower for that. Okay, Mr. Yu, you want to use up the 2 minutes? I think many deputations and also in the papers also mention reducing rates. Would you consider that as an incentive? Whether we will also have designated amount for designated purposes. I think in terms of the administration's budgeting, based on the government approach, we will actually plow back what we've collected to the Treasury. In the future, if there are new resources, new requirement for additional resources, then we'll follow the existing mechanism. And for environmental protection expenditure, it is quite high indeed. So it all depends on how many recycling or environmental protection projects there are, and whether we need to allocate additional or fresh resources into it. As for the rates, at the Environmental Affairs Panel, we explained this already, that the existing rates, some people think that they are related to the processing of waste, but in fact they're not. The rates collected now are a taxation item, so it's really not related to any or doesn't pay for any expenditure on handling waste. So in the future, when we charge on the basis of quantity, we will not rebate rates. Our calculation of rates now is based on the rateable value of a flat, so it's really not related to the amount of waste. For example, if a flat is empty, of course the owner has to pay rates. But in the future, if it's empty, then the owner will not need to pay any waste charges. But you must have heard, the suggestions for, offering incentives, not just imposing penalties on people. Yes, Chairman, you mentioned that too. As for whether we can offer the carrots and sticks, yes, under the principle of quantity base, if you reduce waste generated, then you will pay less. But as for whether there are incentives for recycling or recyclables, particular materials, I think there are some public education publicity campaign on recycling stations that really give the takers bonus or rewards. So people can pay attention to that, but on the whole, if we want to offer large-scale bonus, and that's really not in line with our own thinking. Sorry, Ted, I think our time's up for the first section. We need to have a 5-minute break. So maybe you can ask your questions in the next session. So thank you all for attending today's public hearing. and offering your valuable views. So this session is finished.